My name's Dr. David Grummitt. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the History of Parliament. I work on the parliaments of the 15th century, and today the question I'm going to be addressing is how able a king was Richard III? Richard remains one of the most mysterious and enigmatic of English kings. His reign is seldom discussed in a dispassionate manner by historians and by members of the public. He reigned from the 26th of June 1483 to the 22nd of August 1485, little over 2 years. So it's really very difficult for us as historians to assess just how able a king Richard was. So who was Richard III? He was born in October 1452, the youngest son of Richard, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville. He played very little role in the early years of the Wars of the Roses. In 1460 he was sent into protective exile, really, with his older brother, the Duke of Clarence, to Burgundy. It's not until the late 1460s that we see Richard begin to take an active role in government under his elder brother Edward IV. In 1469, when Clarence, the Duke of Clarence, and the Earl of Warwick rose in rebellion against Edward, Richard remained steadfastly loyal to his brother. He accompanied Edward into exile in the Low Countries and returned in 1471. He was with Edward at the battles of Tewkesbury and Barnet, and he was later implicated, although this may of course be merely a figment of Tudor propaganda. He was implicated in the death of the Lancastrian king Henry VI. Richard benefited from his loyalty to his brother and quickly advanced as one of the leading magnates, if not the leading magnate in the realm. He was given northern responsibility as the king's lieutenant in the north in the 1470s and became heir to a vast estate, not only in the north of England, but also in the Midlands, the southwest, and on the Welsh marches. The strength and power of Richard was evident in 1475 when he led the second largest contingent in Edward IV's army that invaded France in that year. On the face of it, Richard had many of the skills and much of the experience that was necessary to be a successful medieval king. He had quite a bit of administrative experience, for example. In 1469 he had been appointed Constable of England, and as such had officiated in many of the cases that were brought before the Court of Chivalry. He also took part in the judicial functions of the King's Council in the 1460s and the 1470s. In his role as lieutenant in the north, he also had a council which heard judicial cases and ran the government of the north, both military and administrative, on a day-to-day basis. So Richard was well prepared in some ways for the rigours of kingship. Moreover, Richard was renowned as a soldier among his contemporaries. His role in the campaign of 1471 we've already noted, and in 1475 he also accompanied his brother to France. In 1477 he was one of the leading figures in the Yorkist establishment who demanded that Edward actually assist his sister Margaret of Burgundy, whose husband Charles the Bold had recently been killed, assisted her in resisting the invasion of Louis XI, the French king. It was not until the Scottish campaigns of 1481 and 1482 that Richard really had a chance to show his military credentials. The campaign of 1481 was of limited success. It was supposed to be led by the king himself, but Edward failed to turn up. But the campaign of the following year really showed Richard at his best. The English army penetrated as far as Edinburgh and successfully besieged and captured Berwick-upon-Tweed. So in 1483, Richard was very much renowned as a military commander with a great deal of administrative experience. On top of this, Richard has also demonstrated his abilities as a politician during the 1470s. He had made quite a few careful exchanges of land which had augmented his position. He had shown a certain degree of skill in his dealings with the other northern nobles, particularly the Earl of Northumberland, who he had retained as a servant around 1480. The problem for Richard was that these abilities and skills were meant to be employed as a leading magnate, as a buttress to the power of the king, his brother, or the king's successor. It was not easy for Richard to translate these skills and abilities as a magnate to that of king. The problem for Richard was that these skills and abilities learnt during the 1470s were meant to be employed as the king's lieutenant, part of Edward's regional policy. They were not meant to be employed as king. It was not easy to translate these skills to those needed to actually rule the whole of the realm. The events of 1483 then radically altered Richard's position. Edward's sudden death in April and the possible accession of his 12-year-old son, Edward V, really, I think, transformed the political situation. Richard moved quickly to secure his position. He seized Prince Edward V, had his uncle, Anthony Woodville, Lord Rivers, imprisoned, and on the 4th of May entered London and was acclaimed as the new king's protector. What is not generally, I think, appreciated is in those 6 weeks between Richard taking over as protector and him actually coming to the throne on the 26th of June, government actually functioned quite reasonably, quite stably. This was a period of calm, if you like, before the storm. The Protectorate seemed to be working quite reasonably, and Richard's actions of June seem rather presumptuous. There was nothing to suggest that government and stability would collapse. Richard's title was proclaimed by the Duke of Buckingham and then acclaimed by the Londoners. And on the 26th of June, Richard took the throne and the princes were put into the Tower. In key areas, Richard proved himself to be an able king, or at least to give the pretense of being an able king. One of the most pressing concerns when he came to the throne in June 1483 were the royal finances. Edward has often been praised for his efforts in restoring the strength of royal finances during the 1470s, but the fact remains that by 1483 the royal finances were in some disarray. Edward had been profligate in his own spending, and taxation had not really kept up with the level of royal spending. On his accession, Richard restored the so-called Yorkist land revenue experiment. He redoubled his efforts to maximise the potential income of royal lands and exercised a close personal supervision over the royal lands. But the problem was not easily solved. Richard was forced to resort to forced loans. These were extra parliamentary taxes which he had previously outlawed and criticised his brother for. The problems of royal finance were pressing indeed, but Richard, I think, showed himself capable of meeting them head-on. In another key area of royal government, justice, Richard too showed himself a possibly able king. Legal reforms were one of the few areas of government in which Richard can be seen to have succeeded. He set up a nascent Court of Requests. This was a court based at Westminster and designed to hear the pleas of poor men who were unable, for one reason or another, to actually take their cases before the common law courts at Westminster. This later became one of the cornerstones of Tudor royal justice, and its establishment can be certainly traced back to those early months of Richard's reign. Richard also showed himself, like his brother in the 1460s, as a active king in the regard of the execution of justice. He toured the country, hearing pleas in person. Now, it may be that the political circumstances made this necessity, but it's clear that Richard had a real concern that justice was exercised properly. The Parliament of 1484, for example, introduced a number of minor legal reforms which speeded up and made cheaper access to justice for most people in the realm. We're very lucky in that we know, as historians, a great deal about the mechanics of Richard's government. This is due to the chance survival of a Signet Office docket book. The Signet Office was the writing office which corresponded most closely to Richard's own personal affairs. The Signet was the smallest of the royal seals, and instructions written and sealed under the Signet really can be traced right back to the king himself. British Library Harley Manuscript 433 is an extraordinary document which contains a register of the letters and instructions sent out by Richard under his signet. There we can see the king's personal supervision of, for example, the administration of the royal lands, the granting of offices throughout the realm, and his involvement in the day-to-day business of government.